Marek Kamiński, Polish, we were one of the perhaps 5 people throughout Europe studying Gypsies, and we met in the 70s, and he studied them first in Poland and Czechoslovakia. And I've got a wonderful statement he sent me by email only 2 days ago. He fled as an asylum seeker to Sweden, but he said that he could not take notes amongst the Roma in Sweden. It was seen as suspicious. But what he did do was learn to use a video camera. He said it was a 5-kilo heavy box and clumsy. And he said, I left this ancient video equipment with my Gypsy friends. I actually went and met them. I went to Sweden and met up with his Roma friends who often migrated from Poland and Romania. And he asked them to take video for him during his absence. And what was so revealing was that when he was with them, they always said, male clothes must be washed separately from female clothes because otherwise it's polluting. But then when he looked at the video that they'd recorded, he discovered that in the background they were mixing the male and female clothes, and it was all being filmed by them. He said, I've been studying the same Gypsy refugee clan for the past 45 years. And the last time I stayed with them, I filmed them on my iPad. Giuseppe Zuleika, a Basque studying his own people and indeed pioneering studying eto-terrorism, he was at a conference, in a AAA conference long before 9/11, and he was working on eto-terrorism, Basque terrorism. And there was an American colonel who was supposed to share a platform with him and said, I refuse to share a platform with this terrorist, and walked off. Then it was seen you were a terrorist if you were studying terrorism. And of course, as I say in my book, after 9/11, the Americans desperately tried to recruit anthropologists to understand culture. We don't understand culture. So they needed some anthropologists to do it. Anyway, Giuseppe describes how he interviewed ex-ETA members, normally when informally driving or in the car, and then he interviewed some ETA members not from the village, and they agreed to be taped, but of course all is concealed. The travellers, my student Anthony Howard, the Irish travellers he said I lived with, did not want to be photographed, interviewed or filmed. So when people say, oh, note-taking is now superseded by the digital age, Anthony Howard knew that horrendous series, soft porn, My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, which is an absolute disgrace. And they actually call themselves observational filmmakers. They have a famous actress, hands up anybody who's seen My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. Yes, there are just a few. But they have an actress with a voice-over showing gypsy horse-drawn caravans going up to their annual fair in Appleby, which is then celebrating their culture. And the voice-over, Barbara Flynn, says, gypsies need to be dragged into the 21st century, i.e. they are on horse and cart and carriage. Would they say that to the Queen when she arrives in her golden carriage to open the House of Parliament? Would she need to be dragged into the 21st century? No. So the context of note-taking also affects one's topic. When doing fieldwork amongst the rural aged in Normandy, I found it utterly different from among gypsies. I was welcomed as a researcher intellectual. Gramsci said it before me, but the French, they cut off the heads of their monarchs, and then the bourgeoisie who wrote and read books rose to power. We only beheaded one monarch. So our elite do not read books or write them. But I loved escaping to the Sorbonne, where it was good to be an intellectual. So the residents in Normandy were honoured that this professeur anglaise was focusing on them. I first visited Jacqueline Grégoire because she was head of the local club for les personnes âgées. And here's a photograph taken of her after I got to know her well. She agreed to be photographed, but this was long before. I first interviewed her, but to prove my authenticity, in contrast to the Gypsies, I appeared with a pen and paper, and I interviewed her formally and wrote down the answers to show that I was a legitimate researcher. Quite different from Gypsies, where you have to write up in secret in the toilet or at night. After a while, Madame Grégoire, while I was interviewing, she was plucking a chicken all the way through our interview. She said, "J'ai du travail à faire." And I accompanied her to the wonderful barn sheltering 12 cows, and she proceeded to hand milk. After several cows, I said, "Est-ce que je peux essayer ça? Can I have a go?" She looked at me in astonishment. I was then introduced to the one cow that didn't kick, at least les Anglais. And I was introduced, c'est Mère Nono, Judith, c'est Judith. Alors Mère Nono looked round, looked at this weird Anglaise, and agreed to have her teats pulled. And after a while, Madame Grégoire said, "Attendez, je reviens." And she disappeared, and she returned with a flash camera. And here is the return gaze of the subject for research being photographed by the paysan. And absolutely amazing. And this picture was put up in the local photography shop. There's this Professeur Anglaise who was milking cows. And Mère Nono was very naughty because she'd never stepped back to defecate. So there was a lot of stuff on the backside. It was apparently bizarre that this professor should stoop to manual labour. Indeed, I went to a Paris conference in the middle of all this, and I said, "J'attends après les vaches." And this famous French professor of ethnology said, "Mais qu'est-ce que c'est ça?" She was astounded that an anthropologist had to do manual labour. And she'd done work in Brittany, I won't name her. But anyway, it proved to be a wonderful entry to the community, especially in retirement homes. I would say, "Il est 5 heures, il faut aller traire les vaches." And they were terribly impressed. There are other contrasts in this case linking note-taking with the very research topic. I had just finished my book on Simone de Beauvoir, dictating the last paragraphs from a public phone box from the small French town to the Virago publishers. Months and months of writing drafts had brought repetitive strain injury. I was now unfit to embark on writing notes in Normandy. Fortunately, my research grant included financing a university secretary to type. So I dictated my field notes hour upon hour and posted the cassettes back to Essex University. But the unexpected twist to research focus emerged from living in this rural gîte or holiday home available outside the main summer holidays. I dictated during daylight, and I gazed for hours upon hours at the beautiful rural landscape, finding resonances with celebrated artists like Millet and Monet. Thus, thanks to the visualized context of note recording, I became increasingly alert to the local residents' differing engagements with and comments about agriculture and their landscape. And I remembered from years back a statement from a French film. Jean-Louis Barrault had said, Tout le monde l'a regardée, mais moi j'étais le seul à la voir. And so looking and seeing, and I used that, amazing how things stick in the brain, and I wrote about visualism and landscape, the elite's view of the landscape that they don't work, and the peasant's view of the landscape that they do. Several anthropologists revealed they took few notes in studying their own cultures, like Zuleika and Simpson. Clearly there's a build-up of experience from years of participation. Some statements and events anthropologists, indeed most humans, always remember without explicit recording. Context and values change through time, especially in childhood, staining the memory and emotions. Never written down, they are forever registered. My headmistress called me to her study. I was taking some exams and she said, I would be selfish to go to university, I'd be depriving a more worthy person of a place. Those words have remained with me. Similarly, anthropologists may be impressed consciously or not. So let's look in passing, and I've just got a few more minutes, contrasts and comparisons between poetry, art and fiction. The poet Simon Armitage recently declared, writing is static, unsocial. This is very different from an ethnographer who has to participate, observe, where writing through that process is not necessarily static. The challenge for the anthropologist is to transform action and experience into words. There are other contrasts. The actor has to play with others' texts learned by heart. The ethnographer listens to others' spoken words not already written. The ethnographer must remember, then write them down. The actor must remember, then speak them. The anthropologist as fieldworker travels from holistic engagement through daily or nightly scribbles into the static, especially transformed into published text. The ethnographer uses all the senses, including vision, but not usually the same as the artist. Art may be recognized as figurative, realist, impressionist, or abstract, but in all styles, the artist's eyes gaze where vision is primary. Listening may not be crucial to the artist. Some artists make preliminary sketches with subsequent transformation. A novelist is also observer and memorizer, but as with the poet and painter, there are transformations alongside realism and plausible authenticity. Here are some contrasts and comparisons between some disciplines and anthropology's ethnography. An artist may gaze, finalize on canvas. Transformations depend on style. A poet seizes themes, images, events, trivial or melodramatic. Some are selected and condensed, then made musical through rhyme and rhythm. The ethnographer works in the other direction. She or he may enter either the unknown or the seemingly familiar, but the aim is not to transform with creative license of originality. The anthropologist tries to record every aspect in order to reproduce and ultimately interpret. The ethnographer is witness. Note-taking is not preparation for transformation, but as reflection of exactitude leading to underlying the theories of explanation. The ethnographer, occasionally with family and with key local and intermediary associates, aims or attempts to capture all, whether exotically different or commonplace and banal. Inevitably, there are specific angles depending on the positionality of the fieldwork, male, female, young, old, ethnicity, or whatever. The notes are later expanded but not transformed. They are the triggers. Eventually, the fieldworker organises and classifies the material. The final publications are transformed through analysis and interpretation alongside decades of cross-cultural theories developed from the study of peoples across the globe. And then finally, just to end on back to my Gypsy research, I've noted how different anthropologists have written notes in their own or others' language. In England, there is ideally or supposedly just one language, English, but there are regional and class differences. Some have commented that the long quotes from Gypsies in my monograph have a middle-class accent. I had, as Malinowski advised, to learn the local language, but I didn't write my notes that way. I translated them in the way I had been taught at my dreaded boarding school. At my boarding school, I even had to change my beautiful looped handwriting because I was told that was the handwriting of a maid. So that's why my handwriting is all scribbles now. But I did have to learn how to speak the Gypsies' language. And this is Harriet, who would come up to me when I was first there. "Oh, Judith, I do like the way you speak. You must have had special elocution lessons to speak like that." And I thought there's something insincere about that. Anyway, she went off travelling and I learnt to speak the language. I dropped my H's, I extended my vowels, I'd say motor instead of lorry, gather, you extend your vowels and you drop your H's, you say at instead of hat. And it was My Fair Lady in reverse. I had to say, the rhyming spine falls manly in the plain. Anyway, I was talking just like that when Harriet came back from travelling, and she said, "Judith, your speech has improved." So finally, field notes are precious, priceless, and ideally confidential. But ironically, when a Conservative minister took control of the government sometime after I'd finished writing and published my first joint book, and I'd moved on to Oxford, the Conservatives decided to close all independent research centres, which they dubbed quangos. And the centre, which had been financed in part by the Ford Foundation, by Rowntree, but with a tiny bit from the government, that was suddenly closed. And my former manager, now back in the ministry, bizarrely declared that all the typed files of all my field notes should now go to the Ministry of Housing, which would kind of fulfill Dr. Kay's premonition. This contradicted all our political integrity. I got the exact names of everything, all that. It was all in filing cabinets in a basement. So I hired a giant van and I got two very heavy male friends to come with me. And the centre was like the last days of Saigon. It was chaos. Everybody was rescuing things. And we went into the basement and we hauled all the filing cabinets with all my notes and we put them in the van. So we loaded them up. I was determined those intimate pages, not outrageously, become available for all and everyone in government employ. I could not risk later fulfilling Dr. Kay's defamation that I was a government spy. So in the end, in order to save my fieldwork notes, I broke the law. And that's what you sometimes have to do in the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very lively and to some extent also historic talk about many anthropologists that you have met during your life and that we have heard of but that we could not meet.